Okay, good afternoon, everybody. This is Lindsay Wood at DCF. I am joined by Allison Budzinski with DCF. And we actually have special guests this afternoon for this webinar. It is Waukesha County. They also did the last webinar we did either last month or the month before. I can't even remember at this point. But they're just going to go into more detail on the Breakthrough Collaborative series that they are a member of with, I believe, 9 other agencies, counties, states. They'll go into detail on that. So Waukesha County, I'm going to turn it over to you guys if you want to go ahead and introduce who you have on your end. And if there's any questions along the way, feel free to use that chat box. Otherwise, we will do questions throughout. So Waukesha County, I'm turning it over to you guys.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Tracy Clark. I'm a social worker here at Waukesha County.
Allison Noyes, social worker.
Megan Fischler, ongoing social worker.
Kelsey Nisbet, ongoing social worker.
Ruth Griskowski, foster parent.
Janice Ramos, foster care coordinator.
So good afternoon, everybody. Please let us know if the sound is weird and you can't hear us, or if we're talking too loud. So today we're going to talk about the meaningful use of CANS trauma assessment for youth and families. As Lindsay mentioned, the Breakthrough Collaborative Series, also known as BSC. Oh, you can switch slides, Lindsay. Lindsay, switch slides.
Nope, sorry.
Okay, thank you. So the Collaborative Series is a group of professionals who come together to address issues in practice utilizing the change process. And that's what this group has been doing in regard to the CANS. So the objectives of the BSC is to train providers to increase their understanding and knowledge of trauma. We recognize that trauma is key and paramount in all of our work, but realize that it's not as easy to have a conversation with people from different disciplines about trauma. And so that's one of the things that we've been challenged by, and really put work into finding language that is a common shared process for everyone. We also are looking at being able to use the CANS in a reliable way in order to make really meaningful assessments and use the information for treatment planning and services. And that's something that has been a challenge for us because it's new. We haven't used the CANS in that way, so we've really come up with some creative ways to use the CANS in a more meaningful way. We also use the CANS in a way to really create an engagement with the family and to use it as one of the tools of engagement to have authentic communication with families about the CANS, and using strength-based practice and identifying resilience factors and protective capacities along with the needs that are identified. We have used the collaborative to increase our use of the overall CANS scores in terms of how policies are made in our agency and how we practice differently and have a shared understanding of our practice, and to work with systems that go beyond our particular agency, such as our foster parents, and Ruth is here representing foster parents, also outside treatment providers that have been part of our process. So the purpose we have is to gain a brief introduction to the model. This is also known as a PDSA, and you'll hear more about that in a few slides. That's one of the ways that we've been able to test changes in terms of creating practice that is utilizing the CANS in a more meaningful way. Next slide. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so
I'm sorry. Now Allie will take it from here.
Okay, so the VSC is made up of 8 teams from around the United States that use the CANS assessment in their practice. The teams represent a variety of agencies ranging from child welfare to mental health clinics. This is important to note because Wisconsin is not the only state struggling to use the CANS in a more meaningful way. Slide. So I just wanted to go over some of the things that our BSC team does on a regular basis. So we have participated in 2 learning sessions where all the teams come together face-to-face in person, and we learn about each step of the change process and take that home with us. We also have monthly affinity group calls, and the affinity groups are groups that are divided by workers and then supervisors and managers. So each group then has their own calls based on their roles. And then we also have monthly all collaborative calls where all teams are calling in. And then we also do monthly metrics, which I'm not going to go in detail today, but it is about collecting data from our workers, from the families we work with, from the youth we work with, and using that to move forward. We also have bi-monthly core group meetings and quarterly extended team meetings. In our extended team, we also have members of corporate council, we have members, our community partners, we have a therapist on our team, a foster parent, so we also meet. Slide.
So the goal is to be trauma-focused and family-informed in our work. We have a goal of looking at trauma and family-informed practice while we do the CANS. The information that we collect is data-driven, so we're looking at treatment planning in a way that is guided by the data we collect, and we really focus on family engagement so that everyone is part of a team and part of the process, and not that we're doing things in isolation. Slide. So where and how do we start? So this slide says, it's okay, Stan, just pick one flower and start from there. And that's what the PDSA, which is Plan, Do, Study, Act, and Adjust, really helps us do, is to be able to start anywhere instead of feeling overwhelmed because there are so many issues that we could be guided by. Slide.
All right, so now we're going to talk through what is a PDSA exactly. And what it is, like Janice said, a small test of change in our day-to-day practice. The goal for our doing these PDSAs is to really apply what we're learning from these small tests of change and then continue to make the test bigger and broader as we go. We've really focused on keeping these tests of change as small as possible. And one way we've done that is by asking, what can I do by next Tuesday? We've really had to be innovative to make sure that our tests are feasible and that they can be done really quickly as possible. Slide. This is our PDSA form that was given to us from the faculty from the BSC. It's basically a worksheet that we use to guide us as we do our PDSAs. It breaks out the sections, plan, do, study, act, and adjust, and then we fill it out as we do the actual PDSA. What's really neat is that all the teams are filling these out across the country as they do their small tests of change, and then we can learn from each other and see each other's completed PDSA form. So that's what the actual worksheet form looks like. We really want to use PDSAs to support improvement that's sustainable. So we're testing our hunches as quickly as we can. We can do a few at once. We can do many simultaneously. We want to really get buy-in as we go along. So basically we're
we're proving our success as we go, and that's how we get buy-in. And we're really keeping the end in mind. What am I trying to accomplish, and will I make sure that it's sustainable? Of someone saying, quick, form a committee, and all the arrows going at it. And that really speaks to how this is a really much more collaborative way to transform systems. It's different than our old or maybe usual way to implement change within an agency or an organization. We want to move away from maybe labor-intensive work groups or committees and really get down to the nitty-gritty every day of what can we change quickly in our practice. There's endless numbers of ideas we have that we could test using PDSAs, but we're going to walk you through 3 different examples of ones that we've done. I'll start with one that I did, and the title was Initial CANs Completed with CPS Ongoing Social Worker and the Access Social Worker. And we'll just go through each of the steps of PDSA. So for planning, I basically answered these 3 questions on the worksheet. And my objective was to gather much more meaningful and richer information about a child within that first 30 days CANS assessment. And I did this by meeting with the initial assessment social worker and the assigned ongoing social worker together. And I really wanted to improve my understanding of the family through that conversation and through that CANS completion, which hopefully would ultimately lead to improved family partnerships as well as improved case planning. I predicted that it would be a better CAN, much richer than done the old way of the ongoing social worker doing it on their own. So within a week of the case transfer staffing, I led them through the assessment, and then I typed up the results during our discussion of each action item. So that was my planning of that PDSA. Doing, I actually did it, and then briefly I answered the question, did it work? And it did, it went well. We scheduled an hour, but it took a little longer, so we probably could have used more time. That was my do. And then studied it. So looking at the results, I really saw how much was gained from this process. It was a lot more nuanced than I think is usually captured in the initial assessments and the case transfer staffing. And I think it was really maybe more accurate than if we would have just had the ongoing social worker do it on their own. So I looked at the results, and then lastly, act and adjust. You have the option to either expand the test, adapt the test, or abandon the test. Those are your 3 options. This is really how we keep our work alive and keep the PDSAs going. So I decided to expand the test, which really means I want to try it again and try this in different conditions, try it with different social workers to keep learning the pros and cons of this idea. So that's one example. Now I'll turn it over to
So I had chose to do a CANS with a family where the child was in home. After we have all been trained on the CANS, Wisconsin had adapted it as a tool to help understand and kind of put together the rate review that we have for our foster parents. And so I think through the years, it's kind of the true assessment has kind of gotten lost. And because of obviously caseloads and timelines, sometimes we're put in a predicament from getting a case that we have a very short amount of time to be able to kind of turn it around and be able to work with a family to truly get a full assessment. So I had the opportunity with a family who was already in home, the child was in home, an 11-year-old with her mom, a 9-year-old, pardon me, and I had asked to kind of set up time with them that I would be able to take some time to go through some questions that might be a little bit more difficult to talk about, something they haven't gone through before because the child had not been in out-of-home care with a licensed foster parent. So we had not done a CANS to do a rate review in the past. So this was something new to both the child as well as mom. So what I was hoping to do is really kind of use it as an engagement tool and really work with both mom and her daughter to have them better understand kind of what the daughter's gone through, some of her experiences, maybe how things that have happened to her have affected how things are going with her now and in her schooling or, with her relationship with her mom. Excuse me. So when we had scheduled this, we had scheduled it for a time that was, about an hour. And so I started it by engaging with a tip sheet, as DCF has. And you'll see in the chat section, we did put it up there. There should be 2 different tip sheets, and both of them I had used. The DCF one does have description regarding the rate review, and so that tool ended up being obviously more difficult to work on with the in-home family because it wasn't relevant. So for in-home families, in the future, I wouldn't utilize the DCF tool because it does talk about rate reviews when it isn't relevant for an in-home family. So I did go and use the one from the NCTSN, and that tip sheet was about the CANS in general, a bigger picture of what CANS was, what it means, kind of talking about what, kind of scoring is a little bit so that it would be a little bit more broken down for the family. And I saw that to be much more useful with the family, and it opened up a lot of discussion about understanding, well, what is a 3 and how do you go from a 3 to a 2 and kind of making those changes, which usually, it's harder to talk about scoring. It's easier really to talk about more big picture, having that conversation, really engaging, which is really what I wanted it to concentrate on. So though it was beneficial to bring that tip sheet, I did also learn that, talking about the score wasn't really what I wanted to get out of it. What I wanted to do is really have that conversation. So it ended up opening kind of new doors of new discussion regarding the scoring. And there was some talk with Mom about, well, how do we get from a 3 to a 2? Because I want to make some changes or I want to work with my child to kind of make that happen. So that was kind of after that home visit, we had talked about that. So it was interesting. So what I had expected for it to be is really an engagement tool, and it really did equal that. It was a way for me to really have conversations, and some of those kind of uncomfortable conversations, maybe about some trauma or maybe some struggles. To be honest, I was a little protected because those questions were on the sheet, right? So it wasn't like I was randomly asking them these questions to be really overly curious or get into their business. It was just a natural discussion about me better understanding the child, and I was on a couple questions that were uncomfortable to talk about. I could kind of hide behind the CANS assessment because that's just part of the knowledge, and it was for my first time doing it with an in-home family. It was an interesting conversation. So what I want to take from this is really better. We want to use the CANS assessment for all the families that we work with. And this is just kind of that one step to, one action, if you will, to take the next step to kind of spread it to others and have other people be able to utilize the CANS assessment as a true assessment tool of children's strengths and needs so that we can do much better case planning, much better collaboration, engagement with the family and extended team members so that we can really support the children be successful and be safely returned home or reach permanency in an alternative way. So, that's what I took from my in-home CANS.
Hi, everyone. This is Megan. I worked on sharing the results of CANS with family members, and I thought that was important that I kind of shift my thinking as a worker, slow myself down, not just to, hurry up, gather all the information, and then, kind of do the scoring behind the scenes, so to speak. So taking that assessment tool out there, really educating the families that I work with about that it is an assessment tool, that it's research-based. We've been using it in Wisconsin, and we've seen some positive results with that. I also think it offers us the ability to be very transparent with our families, which is very helpful in the engagement. I think it provides us with something that we can print out and take to them. So really my objective was to kind of be able to kind of not only verbally share information, but have that written information for families, because we know that every family learns differently. And again, it's that whole transparency piece. Educate them about the assessment tool. For this particular family, I did a 6-month out one. When I started working with this particular mother, her substance abuse was unmanaged, as was her mental health, and so it was very difficult to engage her really in those really hard discussions. It was very difficult for her with everything she's faced with, as well as having her children placed out of her home was very, very difficult for her. So at the 6-month mark, we were able to kind of see if there's been any changes, whether there's been, changes, whether, in scoring for the strengths as well as the needs. Also, it gave us the opportunity in looking at those actionable items, so things that were identified as being a 2 or 3, are we currently as addressing those in the appropriate manner to make sure that the needs are being addressed? What I predicted was we were going to have some meaningful conversations because everything's out in the open. It's kind of all the cards are on the table theory. That I would get updated, accurate information about kind of what's going on, as well as the parent's perspective. Sometimes when we're just doing them with caregivers, we're getting their perspective and not the parent's perspective. And I think it's very important that parents feel kind of valued and that they know their children best, even during those difficult circumstances. Again, I predicted that hopefully we'd see changes, whether it was positive or negative, again, just to kind of see where things are going. So my plan was, and what I did do is I have a mother. She had 2 children in out-of-home care with a relative, like I said, when I began working with her. She had some significant mental health, as well as she struggled with alcohol as her addiction. So I printed out the cans as well as the actionable items. And so I kind of explained the whole what the cans was about. We went through each section and talked about what had been scored previously, the 6 months prior. And then I reviewed those actionable items with her. So during that meeting, one-on-one in her home, we were able to go through the 2 kids and kind of look at where things had been. So prior to her engaging in treatment. So I think it was very powerful for her to see that prior to her kind of engaging in treatment, that mental health and her substance abuse were rated as a 3. 6 months later, we were able to say that they were rated as 1 because she was in recovery, and I think that was really helpful for her. I think what was also helpful was to kind of talk through what got her there, to kind of reinforce the hard work that she was doing and reinforce that behavior. Such as it was AA a couple times a week, her sponsor, and all those really difficult things, and what she was doing to maintain those things. So that's very important and has a positive impact on our children. So then after we kind of did her part, I did go through, after all that positive and feeling good, show her how her hard work paid off and how it impacted her children. Because their scores had changed, that they were feeling, a stronger bond to her and things like that. So I think that it was very, very positive and very empowering, and I think it gave me new energy as a worker, and I have a newfound respect for the CAMS tool. So Act and Adjust, I continue to do that with families. I love that, again, you can adjust it with our PDSAs. That, I had a father with some delays. I was able to explain it in his terms and kind of give him some background information about his son as he was not present the first couple weeks of his life, or the first 2 to 3 months of his life. And so I think, as we go, just continuing to adjust things as it's going to work for the family and make it manageable. So next, we've had a lot of PDSAs. We only chose to highlight 3 of them in the interest of time. Everyone's very, very busy. So some of them that we have highlighted are listed above, but really discussing the history of the CAN scores with families, completion of the CANs with our initial assessment folks, as well as kind of the collaboration with our ongoing staff. Introduction of CANs to families, bio and foster families by sharing it during family TVs when you have everyone together as a group so they're getting the same information. Completion of the CANs with clinical providers, such as the kids in therapy. I think that's helpful because they have a different perspective in how they would probably rate from what we would rate. Completion of the CANs with a bio family and foster family. Review of CANs in supervision with the social workers. We said in-home CANs on children that were placed in the home, and then role play for social workers to really get us comfortable with talking to families about the assessment tool. And I'm going to hand it off to Ruth, our foster parent.
Well, hello, I'm Ruth Kraskowski, and I've been a foster parent. My husband and I have been a foster parent in Waukesha County for going a little over 5 years. And I always like to start with telling you a little bit about who I am and kind of my background. Like I said, I'm married. I have my husband and I have 3 grown children, 28, 26, and 24, 2.5 grandbabies. And so really, why we decided to kind of do foster care our kids were all grown and out of the house, and we kind of had this big house, and we weren't really sure what to do with it. And, you know, I guess I'm not really sure. I don't know who said it first, but we'd always thought about fostering. And so we decided to really kind of branch into that with really the idea that we would give kids, you know, kind of a safe place, an opportunity to give back. We felt very blessed with what we had. But we really had no desire to have any more forever kids, nor do we really have a desire for that today. You know, we were not looking to adopt or anything like that. And so over the last 5 years, we've had kids from 3 months to 17 years. We've had typically sibling groups and teenagers, it seems like. We've had 7 different placements, 14 different kids. We've worked with 20-plus social workers. And I guess I'm really, one of the things we're really passionate about is the whole concept of shared parenting. So we've really had an opportunity to work with many of, if not the mom and dad, family members of our kids, and almost all at this point, except the 2 we have now, all have been returned home to some either parents or family members. And so that's something that we really feel proud of, because that's really why we got into this, realizing that kids want to be with their families and trying to do our part to help make that a safe thing to do. I wasn't really sure why they asked me to be a part of this DSC. I think maybe it's because I talk a lot and I have a big mouth maybe, which is probably why now they might regret that they invited me to be a part of the DSC. But it's really been an absolutely amazing experience. And so I guess I want to talk a little bit about what my perspective was as a foster parent prior to the BSC starting. And, I had such respect for and I have such respect for the social workers that, we've dealt with over the years, and the amount of work that they have, and most importantly, I think, the passion and the commitment that they have for the kids that they work with. I really saw that. But one of the things when we started this BSC is I realized that I didn't even know what the CANS was. I had never really heard of the CANS. My experience was I'd get a call, they'd come and drop a kid off, and I really knew very little. I knew probably the 3 or 4 or 5 minute conversation that we would have, and maybe as time went on, I would learn a little bit more. Maybe some what I would call buzzwords, like, oh, they had ADHD or they had this or that. But, those first few weeks when they drop a kid, when we get a little one, there's so many appointments, and we're trying to find schools, and we're trying to set up visits and social workers and literally 4 doctor's appointments, and so there's so much going on, and then all of a sudden, 30 days in or 3 weeks in or whatever it is, you get this phone call, and I would get a phone call, and they'd say, well, here's going to be the rate. And I'd be like, okay. And even sometimes I felt like they were saying, here's the rate, is that okay? And I was kind of like, well, yeah. I mean, I didn't know what that meant, and so kind of seeing if that was okay. I just would say, I didn't really understand what that all meant. And so then the other thing that I really didn't understand, probably until the BSC process, is the whole concept of what a treatment plan was. I'd get a lot of things in the mail, and we'd have a lot of discussions, and I know parents were working on things and kids were working on things, but I never really understood the concept of a treatment plan and what that meant to us on a daily basis, and really didn't feel like, there was really much input, obviously, into that we had as foster parents. And really, prior to the BSC, I guess I didn't think it didn't occur to me that wasn't the way it was I don't even know if I would say supposed to be. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that, or there was any different way to do it, I guess is a better way to say it. And so, you know, we were just in it to keep kids safe, and we didn't really want to make waves. And the other thing that I think is really interesting that I felt, and I've talked to other foster parents that have felt, is that really we didn't want to ask too many questions, or at least some foster parents. I'm sure not all foster parents, but some foster parents, you know, they don't want to make too many waves because then you might not give them more kids, or you might take away the kids they have, or, you know, they're somehow doing something wrong. And I felt that way often. And then when I started talking to other foster parents who felt that same way, I was kind of relieved, to be honest. And, you know, I guess if I kind of do an overview of how I felt at that time, in hindsight, of course, I think I just felt a little bit out of the loop, you know, and I think I had great social workers. It wasn't that, you know, anybody did anything wrong. It was just kind of the process that we were following. And it was really frustrating to feel out of the loop when this child was with us kind of 24/7, you know, and so I guess that's, and I wouldn't even, again, I didn't know that I was felt out of the loop, but that's just kind of the way it was for probably the first 3 or 4 years that we were doing foster care. And then I was asked to be a part of this CSC, and we went to Baltimore, which was where the first session was, and I really took away a lot from those sessions. And I think, so we had some prior phone calls, and then we go for 2.5 days. We fly and go to Baltimore, and we have this meeting, and there's all these people there in all these different states. And it was, to be honest, it was extremely overwhelming. It was exhausting. There was this whole language, like new language. I had really no idea half the time what people were talking about. So there was a pretty big learning curve for me just in the whole social work conversation, I think. But one of the first things I really felt empowered by, I guess, was the fact that we weren't the only ones, Wisconsin, Waukesha County, we weren't the only ones really struggling. You know, everybody else in the room was having some of the same struggles. And so being kind of not understanding the process, it was kind of nice to know it wasn't just Wisconsin. So I guess some of the other things I took away from those first couple sessions was how very confusing and poorly worded the whole CANS tool is in general. There was lots of discussion about that. There were other professionals who said, you know, the same thing. Why isn't there a different way to use this or a better way to word this? Things like that. And many of the PDSAs that were used were really about how to word them, the questions better to really get their point across. And I really kind of, one of my first thoughts was, well, why use it at all? And I had a really interesting conversation with a pediatrician that was there from, can't remember, Maine, thank you, Maine. And I said that to her, and she said, any tool you're going to use is going to have challenges. And that was really helpful to me because I can think back to other processes and things I've been a part on, and I think that's very, very true. And so to see that there's so many people really committed and passionate to making this work the best was really cool, I think. Another big takeaway for me was the small test of change. To do things, you know, small is really hard for me. I wanted so badly to be a good contributor to the team, and so I wanted to have my own, quote-unquote, own PDSA, and so I kind of asked to do a CANS in the family team meeting after a child had been with us for 4 months, and I learned an incredible amount about the child, the family. I can't even go into how much I learned. I felt so much more confident about what we needed to do as foster parents. I was actually even a little more scared and nervous about the child, maybe even for a little bit. But I really learned a lot in that process. In hindsight, we would do it extremely differently next time. I think I was probably too much of a bull in a china shop, and we kind of pushed it through. We probably should have done a little more planning and some other things. But I actually heard one of the other social workers that was a part of the case when they were walking out, who doesn't do cans in their division, say, wow, that was really helpful. So I think there's this idea that other people are hearing, that it's working differently or can be worked differently. So even though I would do it, we would maybe do it differently, it was invaluable to me. And I guess what's really invaluable about the process that I'm learning is information. For me, information and knowledge is super powerful. And it helps me better understand the child that's in our home and can help better advocate for that child, but also advocate for ourselves as foster parents so that we can continue to do good work for the kids. To understand, I guess, where the challenges are, but really where they come from. Not just that the child or the little one has issues, but where they came from, and it kind of puts more perspective on it. And then I really liked the part where we start talking about the strengths and using that as an opportunity to help move things forward. And one of the kind of the things I was surprised at that I learned through this whole little BSC CAMS process is that it really kind of started to confirm that we weren't crazy as foster parents. We'd get these kids and I'd see all this behavior, or these things, or I wouldn't see what they talked about, or, whatever the case may be, and then I'd be like trying to explain it to somebody, but when you go through that CANS, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, oh, that makes sense. That's why they don't want the light off, or that's why they don't like to sit next to the door, or whatever the case may be. It just was really, really helpful. So, and I think probably the reason, the biggest thing that it's done for me and my husband is that it's really taught us to better advocate for ourselves as foster parents and not be afraid to ask those questions. And unfortunately for the county, maybe not be afraid to make waves. I learned that because of got a lot of support from my affinity group to be able to know how to ask questions and what questions to ask. And probably for my husband and I, if we had not been a part of the BSC, this probably would have been our last placement that we would have taken. So it's really kind of reinvigorated us. So what, the team has really said to me, it's so important that people hear the foster parent perspective. And I'm one foster parent, so I don't know how important that is, but I wanted to think about what I most wanted you to know as from a foster parent to a social worker. And I think the first one is most important, that foster parents need support. And I think the CANS is an ability to do that. When you have no or little information, it gets just really, really scary. And you've kind of opened your house and your family and, up to this. And then when you don't really understand or know, the kind of magical thinking kicks in, I think. And then all of a sudden I might even make it worse than it really is. And you wonder, why am I doing this? And then your family and friends say, why are you doing this? And so, that whole idea of information is really, really allows it to be less scary in the process. And I think one thing I would ask, and I would like you to know from what I've seen from my team here, is take the risk. It sounds like the CANS has had maybe a few stumbles in the kickoff and starting the process, and so maybe to take the risk of trying the CANS tool again in a discussion, or trying it differently, or just one little tiny thing, and to see what that does to your practice. And I love what Megan said. it's really reinvigorated her. And so that's I think, really, really awesome. And to know that by taking that risk, that there has been better communication and more communication. We've been focusing on the right things so that we can better serve the kids in our care. And really know how to, and what that means, better serve the kids in our care. Well, what does that really mean? And, just how we approach kids. We have learned, since we usually have more than one kid in our home, that you can't approach everybody the same way, and not understanding exactly why that is all the time. And obviously you can't know all the whys, but when there are whys to know, it's nice, so that we can approach them differently and make a plan to approach them differently. Let's see. And I guess the last thing I probably would want you to know is that what you do is so amazing that you don't give up. That there's so much that you do, and there's so much work. And it's what I found is that in the end, by doing this CANS process, and kind of decreasing that fear factor, that I think there's not as much emotional energy spent on trying to deal with all that stuff. And so hopefully there's more emotional energy out there to spend on all the other people and all the other kids that need help. So I just think by working through the process, it really helps. And then let's see, next steps to meaningful use. Well, I guess before I was unaware, and now I know better. And so when you know better, you do more and are more responsible. So I would use it to help us better serve kids by helping them feel safe and secure and loved and stability, routine, understanding their experience, communicating. And I think the big one is understanding their triggers. There's so many things that happen with a child in care that all of a sudden, I don't think it's a big deal. This is how we've always lived our life, or what we do in our household, and all of a sudden you realize that, somebody gets really triggered by something kind of what I think is obscure. And if we know those biggest triggers, then we can connect that on a daily basis. And so from my kind of next steps for my PDSA is to really try to connect what I've learned about my kiddos in the CANS to kind of what does that mean day to day for us in our home. How do we really look at taking that treatment plan that I've now got to understand and putting that into day-to-day practice and conversation. And really using the CANS in a new way to educate, help us to connect the dots. I feel like I'm kind of, well, I guess here's a good way to put it. If I think about kids that come in, we get these kind of names, they're given issues. They have RAD or PTSD or OD or ADHD or OMG or LOL. I'm just kidding. But, and they have all these letters. And, what does that really mean when they're in your home? And they go to a counselor once a week, which is super important. And they have some other services. But in the end, most of their day-to-day time, if not at school, is spent with us as foster parents. And so to be able to use that to better understand not just what RAD is, but how that came to be. What was, before the problem. And we have a child right now who has some RAD. And so we've started to get this history and really come to understand that people left him a lot, and so that's kind of an easy answer, right? But now I understand why when I don't pick him up within 3 minutes early, he starts to freak out because he thinks we're not coming back. And I wouldn't have understood that leaving part connected to the RAD piece, or maybe it's connected to some other diagnosis, I don't know. But I wouldn't have connected it all if it wasn't for the CANS. The whole no eye contact, You know, I now can understand what that's about and where that's coming from. And I can do something different. And one of the things we've tried differently with that is instead of keep asking them to look at us and talk like, if you respect us, you look at us. And we just decided to start sitting next to them instead of looking at them. And that seems to have really helped. And again, that's something I wouldn't have really known about. So, you know, I have lots of next steps in my own mind and in my own, what I guess I would say my own treatment plan as I look at it as a foster parent. So I'm really very grateful. I think it's been a huge privilege to be a part of the BSC, and to get to know better this Waukesha team is really, it's been really an honor and a privilege, because to see the people who are really on the front lines and how much they care and all the work that they put into being really passionate about this is really important. So, you know, I think the bottom line for me is this whole process has really kind of recommitted me to being a foster parent, as I can really see my place in the process more than ever before. So I guess with that, I will turn it over to Jen.
So, just to kind of review, collaborative system for change and the way to transform systems is to test, which we do through the PDSAs that we've talked about, implement, to actually implement something and see how it plays out in real time with real families, and then spread is something that we've been talking about at our last meeting. The larger group got together in Chicago a few months ago, and that was the focus of that meeting, was to spread what we've learned and bring it to our family partners, our other providers, and our agencies as a whole. And so that's kind of where we're at right now, working on spreading information with our peers. Some of the things that we talked about previously, like doing role-playing with peers, was part of the goal of spreading. And then from here, we will be looking at how to sustain. So that's the next and final leg of our journey in the BSC will be to find ways to really create leadership opportunities for people to really continue all the things we've learned and benefited from for the sake of children and families. And resources, if you're interested in finding out more about what we've talked about and different tools that you can utilize in your practice, you can click on these links to get that information.
Okay, I'm going to assume there's no questions then. Waukesha County, do you guys have anything else you want to add?
No, I think we're good. Thank you for your time.
Thank you guys so much for presenting. It was great to hear about all the PDSAs that you guys have done. I know you only talked about 3 of them, but you've done so many more. And Ruth, thank you so much, too, for being here and sharing what your experience has been. I don't think we always get to hear from foster parents and what their experience has been. And so that's just really helpful to get to hear that and learn from you as well. So thank you so much for everything that you shared during the webinar today.